Hi everyone, I'm Carol. I just want to talk about buttons and triggers and how they work. So I'm going to start off with a positive example first. Just imagine being out for lunch with a friend and something funny happens and you burst out laughing. And then that reminds you of something that happened 6 months before and your friend wasn't there and it was just as funny. And now you want to share that story with your friend and you're both laughing. You're laughing so much, you've got tears rolling down your face. You're holding your side because firstly, it's hard to tell them because you can't stop laughing. And then when you tell them, they're laughing as well. So it reminds you of how funny it was the first time that you actually saw it happen. Okay. So what that is the laughter with your friend in the very first instance. So when the first thing happened and you start laughing, that then pushed a button in you. So that has then reminded you of something else that was really funny, that made you laugh just as much, and that triggers your response. So your response was telling your friend and sharing the story with them. Now, for most of us, unfortunately, our buttons and our triggers are actually connected to negative emotions. So something usually that would create a trigger or a button relates to a trauma or a tragedy that we've had in our life. And while we're going through it, we have all these feelings and all these emotions that come up. Now, if we don't process and heal those emotions, they stick with us. And we might not think about how we felt. We'll always remember the event or the trauma. That's always going to be there. Even though it belongs in the past, it's always going to be there with us as we move forward. But the idea in healing is to process the emotions and release them so there won't be buttons that can be pushed. Because what actually happens is we go through the trauma or the tragedy, we have all these emotions, and if we don't deal with them and we push them deep down inside, our subconscious actually files them away. And the next time we go through something that makes us feel the same, it brings that to the forefront and it reminds us of something else that made us feel as bad. So that reconnects us to the event or the trauma. Now, I'd really like to say that if we release the emotions, there's going to be no button. And if there's no button, there's no trigger. But it doesn't work like that. And I'll explain why in a moment. But when we go through our healing, our aim is to release the negative energies that we no longer need, or the negative emotions that we no longer need. And what that will do is it will actually help us to be able to manage our emotions in the future when something else happens that makes us feel the same way. Now, there's 4 steps in being able to do that. So the first step is to actually acknowledge what's happened. The second step is to accept it. The third step is to get in contact with your emotions and to process them. And the fourth step is to release them. Now, where I say that there's still going to be buttons is because the buttons are not only connected to emotions. The buttons can also be connected to a song that might remind you of a time that made you really sad. They might be connected to a word that someone might use that reminds you again of what had happened. It could be a thought. You could be watching a movie. There's lots of different things that could set off your button. But if you don't try and understand your emotions and connect to them, we're never going to know when our buttons are being pushed and when they're not. So just remember that something has to happen to actually remind us. So the button is that it brings up all the emotions that remind us of something, which sets off the trigger, which is our response. So a response can be either reliving it over and over again, which is not ideal. Our response could be doing more healing. Our response could be sharing it with someone, because by sharing things with someone, that also helps us heal because we're releasing it as well. What I would like to say is this. It doesn't matter how much work we do on ourselves, because